Good morning. We are on Mem Gimel Mud Aleph 43a. We are at the Mishnah. Good morning. We're just about to get started. So we are at the Mishnah. So the previous Mishnah, the Gemara that followed. No.
What are you going to share?
Sotah. Yeah. Absolutely. So the previous Mishnah, the Gemara that followed, discussed the first speech the Kohen gives to the people before they go to war, and the main subject of the speech, right in the middle of Yud. The main subject of the speech is that you shouldn't be afraid of battle. The second speech he gives, and that's the Mishnah presently, this speech is actually delivered by the Shoitrim, by the officers, military officers. And this is the speech which tells those who are exempt from war to go back home. So the Mishnah is going to go through the details of who goes back home, or actually who's exempt from battle, what they do, and who are those that don't have to show up to the battlefield at all. This is where we are at the moment.
It's very strange that they can even walk miles.
So we're going to see. They don't exactly go back home, but as I mentioned this before, even if they're exempt from war, they're not exempt from showing up for duty. Everybody has to show up for duty. And then if you're told your duty is to go somewhere else, then your duty is to go somewhere else, but everybody's got to show up for duty. But we're going to see they do have a job that they have to fulfill, and that there are others who don't have to show up to the battlefield at all. This is where we are now. So that's what they do. We'll see. Something like that. Okay, V'dibru hashoitrim ela'am. The verse says, and the officers speak to the people. Lamar is saying, we're Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, Mishnah. So the people, the officers speak to the people saying, Mi ha'ish, who is the person, Asher bana bayis chadash, who built a new home, V'lo yichinchai, and didn't inaugurate it. He hasn't properly moved into his home. Yelech v'yashav l'beisai, should return and go back home, v'gomer, etc. And the verse goes on to say, lest this person die at war and someone else inaugurate his home. The next verse says, who is a man who planted a vineyard and hasn't spent it, we'll get to what that means in a minute, and he should turn back home, lest he die in battle, and someone else shall use the field he planted.
Random question. Why were they all going there? And then they tell them, oh, once you're here, whoever did this, go back.
Yeah, that's what Alan was just asking. So, and the point is, everybody has to show up to duty. You have to show up. If you're told to go home, okay, go home. But everybody has to show up. The country's at war. You don't get to just stay home. You have to show up. And if you're told you go home, go home. But we're going to see soon they actually do have a job. We're going to see in a minute. So first, the Gemara comments on the first group of people that are exempt. Those are the people that build a new home. So says the Gemara, the Mishnah, I'm sorry. Whether they built a home, not just a home to live in, but a home for their a teven is new. Hey, thank you. No, there's a word for it. Hey, crops, not crops, no. Hay, like yeah, hay, grain, something like that. I think grain is the one I'm looking for. Okay, so even if you build a home like that, mean, it's not just a home to live in, but you're building a structure in which you're going to house your grains, then you can, this is part of the group of people that built a new home and can go home, you can go back. Hey, Sabakar, whether you built a home for your cattle, Beisa Eitzim, you built a home to store wood, or Beisa Eitzeres, where you built a storage house, as Rashi explains, this is for wine or oil. So you built any of these kinds of homes, you're in the list of people that can go back. Echad Abayna, whether you actually built it, Vechad Alekeach, or whether the person purchased it, Vechad Ayodesh, or whether the person inherited it, or whether it was given as a gift. So long as the verse goes on to say, you just got it, and let this person die at war and not be able to inaugurate it, and someone else inaugurate it, then he's allowed to go back. So it doesn't make a difference how he acquired it. The point is that he has it and he hasn't inaugurated, and therefore someone else might do it in this place. So he goes back. And the next verse goes on to say, who is the person, says the officers to the people, to the legions. Who is someone who built a vineyard? Chilulai means it's a halachic designation, which means one who hasn't made it, rendered it to be mundane, chol. So what this essentially means is, when you plant a field or a vineyard, for the first 3 years, one may not eat of the crop that is called arla. Not just can't eat, can't derive any pleasure from it. So it's left alone for 3 years. In the 4th year, you may enjoy the produce that's the field yields, but you cannot eat it alone, or you could, but you have to take it all to Jerusalem to eat it there. That's the rule. The 4th year, and that's called the Rabbi. You have to, the 4th year, you take all that crop and you bring it to Jerusalem and eat it there. Now, obviously, if you're planting a massive field, and it's all, let's say, apple orchard, what are you going to do? Eat 1,000 apples in Yerushalayim? Impossible. So you do a process called chilul. It means to like mundanify, to make it mundane. And what you do is, it's a declaration you make saying all the produce here is going to be, all the holiness of this, all the halachic designation of all the produce in this field will be transferred to this money. Now you have cash. You take the cash to Jerusalem and you spend it there and eat it there. That's the process of l'chalel. It's like you're, it's a transference of like it's like you're buying your way out, because the produce is worth value. So you're taking the value of that produce and bringing it to Shalim, even though you're not bringing the actual produce. We do the same thing with Meiser Sheni. Meiser Sheni is a tithe that after the person gives his tithe for the Kohen and to Levi, during certain years in the Shemitah cycle, you would take X amount of value of that produce, again, the cash, and then take it to Jerusalem and eat it there.
So it has to use no cash.
Yeah. It's the value of the produce. It's how much you have to spend and how much it costs is much halachic discussion. Okay, so once he's transferred the halachic designation of the produce to the cash, then the produce becomes proper, regular, mundane. That's the word chol, mundane. Now you can eat the produce and enjoy it, or sell it, whatever you want. Yeah, because you've transferred the halachic designation to the cash. What usually would happen actually in the old day is you would collect all this cash, either from your Meiser or from your 4th year, and you would take it up to Jerusalem when you would go with your family for Yom Tov. And you basically buy all of your Yom Tov meals with that money, because you're anyways eating in Yerushalayim. So it was like your Yom Tov stack of cash that you then take to Yerushalayim and eat it with you and your, because it's not only you have to eat it, you can eat it with your family too. So you go up there, buy all your Yom Tov meals would be paid for by this kind of money. That's what we used to do back in the day.
Lives 35 miles away from Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
And he comes to Jerusalem. He's got added expenses for food, for lodging.
Yeah. So he can use it for food. It's for food. So that's right. So all that money from his 4th year of produce, the money from his Meiser Sheni, from his second tithe, he would bring it to Jerusalem and spend it there. Right? Which meant it's a beautiful thing, because let's say you're in Yerushalayim for a whole week or for a week and a half, because you come a few days before Yom Tov and you leave a couple days after. Everything you're doing, all the meals you eat during that time, is a mitzvah meal. It's a Yom Tov meal. It's a mitzvah meal, because it was paid for by Meiser Sheni, which has all kinds of halachas about how to eat it, and you can't leave Jerusalem with it. So it elevated your whole experience in Yerushalayim. There's like multiple compounded mitzvahs. We don't have this part of Yiddishkeit today, but back in the old day, this was your whole Yiddishkeit, was your field. You're working the ground of Eretz Yisrael and then going to Shalim for pilgrimage and doing all of your things, your karbanis, everything you ate, your meat that you ate throughout Yom Tov was your karban, your shlamim or your chagiga, your whatever. Your meat was from karban meal, The rest of your produce you bought with your Meiser Shana money. Everything you're doing was one big, the celebration of the eating, the drinking was all within the context of your mitzvah. It was all in the context of you thanking Hashem for the produce and the land you have. It's something we don't have, but that was a huge part of Yiddishkeit then.
Who gets all the money?
Whoever you buy the produce from.
Their surplus, it goes to Tzedakah, or?
It's not so simple. That money can't be given away. It has to be in Yerushalayim. So you could give it to someone else, and the other person could eat it for you. So you invite a bunch of guests to your house for Yerushalayim, and in Yerushalayim, whatever, a few families together go together, coming from X town. They all pull together. They get a place together. They do the Pesach offering together because everybody got a little piece, and then it's a whole. There's a whole part of Yiddishkeit that we don't experience today. But that was a big, in some ways, more than the shul, which is a big part of our Yiddishkeit. For them, much more was the traveling to Yerushalayim and the karbanis and the produce they would bring and the whole celebrations. That was a huge part of their. We don't have it today. That was a big part of their Yiddishkeit. And so the pasuk is saying a person who planted a field and hasn't yet got to the point where he designated the first time he's allowed to eat of the produce is year 4, after designation, transferring the halachic status to the cash. That's chilul. He hasn't done that yet. So this is the person who can go back from war. That's the first is saying. So says the Mishnah, whether you've planted an entire vineyard, as the verse says, or whether you planted chamisha ilone Michael, 5 fruit-bearing trees. That's the minimum amount that constitute halachically a vineyard. And you can see in the corner, there's a picture. Rashi makes a little map for you of what it looks like. That's what the halachic says as shtayim v'achad yotzei zanav. The halacha describes it as 2 by 2 and 1 tail. So your five tree orchard is shaped like a 1, 2, 3, 4, like a square, like 4 corners, and the 5th one is protruding to one direction, like a tail.
So it has to be in this manner.
Yeah, because otherwise, that's right, correct.
Here.
That's right, because a vineyard, can't be in the middle. It has to be shaped like that. That's the minimum size of a vineyard for all kinds of halachas, for kilayim, for meiser, for truma. All kinds of halachas are related to this shape. But that's the minimum size of a vineyard. So if a person did that, he goes back for more. Even if there are 5 different types, so each tree is a different type of fruit, he still goes back to work because that still counts as a vineyard. Whether you actually planted it from scratch, or whether you did so by mavrich, means to like take the vineyard and you put it back into the ground so it keeps on growing forward. What's it called?
Bending the branch.
Yeah, there's a word for it though. It's called something. Remember, or whether you're grafting, right? So you're taking one branch and then grafting into a different branch and growing out a new vine. Whether you purchased it, whether you inherited it, or whether you received it as a gift. Point is, you have now a new vineyard. However you acquired it or however it was planted, so long as it qualifies as a vineyard and it's new, you are part of the group of people that can go back home. The next verse reads, Umiya ish, and who is a man, asher eres istoi, that betrothed his wife, etc. The verse goes on to say, and he didn't take her home. He betrothed her, but didn't take her home. Today, we do both parts of the ceremony in one shot. Mm-hmm. And there's really 2 stages to the halachic marriage. The first is designation, which is kiddushin or erisin, betrothal.
The paperwork. Yeah,
so it's like engagement, what we call engagement, but our engagements today are just a verbal agreement. It's not a halachic, doesn't have halachic kiddushin. And kiddushin essentially is, she is now exclusively his, but they aren't married yet. The next thing is nisuin, actual marriage, or chuppah, which is essentially she moves into the house and then become officially married. It's the second stage. Sorry?
Not like today.
Today we do both at once.
I'm saying a lot of people. I'm saying whatever, they already are together and then they get married.
We're talking about the religious circles and from the Torah version of the marriage. You don't control for the whole world, unfortunately. Not unfortunately, it's just the way it is. So we do today, halachically speaking, we do both at once. which is he gives her a ring. That's Kiddushin, to make a bracha, right? And then they read the ketubah to make a break between phase one of the marriage, and then they do the second half of the marriage, which is the other 6, 7 brachas, and they're under a chuppah and they go into a secluded room, and that's the whole process. But back in the old day, it could have been a full year, actually, or a long time. The Gemara elsewhere discusses how long it has to be between the two. Enough time for him to get his house in order so he can prepare a home for her to move into. Enough time for her to get her jewelry and her gown and prepare her wedding. So they would have like a whole time between the two stages. So the verse says someone who betrothed the woman but didn't take her home yet, then he should go back home, because lest he die and someone else is going to take his wife. Right? So the verse says, so someone who betrothed his wife, didn't take her, go back home lest he die and someone else will take her. Okay. So Echad Ha'Ma'aris is a psola, says the Mishnah, whether he betrothed a woman who is a virgin, never married before, Echad Ha'Ma'aris is Salmana, or whether he is betrothing a widow. It doesn't matter. The point is it's a new wife for him, even if it's not her first husband. Afilu Shemeres Yavam, even someone who is waiting to marry his deceased brother's wife, right? This is halacha we've come up to in the past, unique mitzvah, where a husband dies childless, then the marriage that these two had essentially rolls over to his brothers, and all he has to do is live with her, because the marriage of the previous brother continues going. And as the Torah says, the idea is that the brother with the wife should build the home that the brother didn't get a chance to, because he died without children.
So he's fighting next to his brother. His brother gets an arrow in the head.
And he's got to run back home.
He lives.
That's right. So this is someone, okay, now this person didn't go to battle yet. He's on his way to battle,
Yeah,
right? So he's hearing that if he has a deceased brother's wife back at home, he goes and either marries her or does chalitza. Chalitza is the process by which they separate, they annul that agreement.
King David, he sent the general out to
Something like that, yeah.
in love with his general's wife. He sent the general out to the battlefield, got killed.
We had occasion to discuss that at length here as well. Okay, so again, so whether he's marrying a woman who married for the first time, whether he's marrying someone, this is her second marriage, or whether he's waiting, whether he's like, his brother died and he's somewhat connected to the sister-in-law. And now to your point, Perry, even if he heard his brother died at battle, it means he heard, but he doesn't know yet what the story is. But he hears his brother died. So Chayzer, Ubalai, Ubalai, he goes back and can be with her. Okay. Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, Kol Elu, all of these people mentioned above, they have to go out there and listen to the entire speech from the Kohen, who gives them his whole speech not to be afraid, and then only afterwards they go back, as we discussed. But what do? They're still on duty, but they're kept away from battle. What do? They go back and provide food and water for soldiers. They peel potatoes, and they prepare the roads for the soldiers that have to go back and forth. So this is what they call in the IDF JOBNIKim. You know the expression?
Yeah.
JOBNIK?
Yeah.
Someone who has this kind of job. So the word JOBNIK is actually used a little bit derogatory by the soldiers.
He's
just sorry?
If someone gets on trouble on the base,
they turn him into a JOBNIK, yeah. So it's spoken of derogatorily. But I think here the Torah is actually saying it in the positive.
they're still supporting the war effort.
Exactly, which is why they show up to battle. They're on for duty. Now, it so happens their duty is to peel potatoes, not to hold a gun and shoot. So what? But you're here on duty. You got to treat every duty with its due right. But at the same time, it's strategically smart to give these jobs to someone who has a vested interest in not dying. I mean, everybody has a vested interest in not dying, but especially a guy like this, who has a wife who's not married to yet, and has a house he hasn't moved into yet, and has food that he can't even eat yet, and so on. Okay, now the Gemara says, the following are those people who might have thought they're exempt from war, and they can go to become a JOBNIK, because they built something new or because they're somewhat married. when they think they can go back. But says the Mishnah, note, they're not included in the list. They have to stay in the battlefront. Namely, Haboina Beis Shar, someone who builds a entranceway to their house. So he's built an extension. Or Achsadra, he builds in like a Achsadra, that's the word I was looking for, veranda. Achsadra is like the the ancient Roman structures would have outdoor of the house that have these pillars with like an awning over it. Yeah. That's what an Achsadra is. And Murpeses, we built a balcony. So if you build this little kind of extensions to your house, that doesn't constitute as a new house, and you got to stay on the battlefield. Likewise, someone who plants 4 fruit-bearing trees, so he's under the minimum to qualify as a full vineyard. As we described before, a vineyard is specifically 5. So if he planted 4, not a vineyard, he's got to stay in the battlefield. Likewise, if he planted 5 non-fruit-bearing trees, so he planted 5 trees, but they're not fruit-bearing, so they don't constitute as a vineyard, and therefore he stays in the battlefield. Likewise, one who remarries his divorced wife, he also doesn't go back home to be with his wife. Because again, the whole point is someone who's never been with his wife before, and he might die and someone else will take his place. This person's been living with her for a long time, or whatever, however long it is. Now he's just remarrying her, so that person stays in the battlefield. Likewise, someone who gets married to someone that he shouldn't be married to, right? They're in halacha, there are certain women or certain people that one cannot marry, and if they do, that wedding is nothing. So if a person gives a ring to his sister and says, you're now betrothed to me, and he has witnesses, nothing happens. They don't have to divorce. That marriage never took effect. But then there are people that Torah says one should not marry. But nonetheless, if they do go ahead and marry, the marriage takes effect. They're living in sin and they have to go through divorce. Yeah. So those people that we're going to list in a moment, they stay on the battlefield.
Does Kedushin work like on a non-Jew?
No.
There's no such thing as like
Kedushin and types, and that's the Lashon. The Kedushin doesn't take hold. It's like giving your sister a ring. It doesn't take hold. It doesn't take any effect. Same thing with a non-Jew. Right, but the following list are people who Kedushin is Taifsin. The marriage does take effect, even though Torah says you shouldn't have married her, and they're required to divorce. So those people, if they did marry such a woman, they wouldn't go back home. They would stay on the battlefield because they weren't supposed to marry to begin with. And they are Almana, a widow, Lakoyan Gadol, to a high priest. High priest must marry someone who's never been married before. So a high priest who marries a widow, the marriage takes effect, but they
loses his designation.
But he loses his designation, therefore he stays on the battlefield. Does that mean a Kohen Gadol actually goes to war? Look at that. High priest is going to war.
I'm just going to ask you if the Kohen go to war.
The high priest is here at war. Right? That's what it seems like. Right? Isn't that amazing? Which means there's another Kohen who's not as high as a level of his, who's giving a speech. And he's with the ranks listening to the speech. Right? We designated Kohen Mashuach Muhammad. We designated a unique Kohen to give this whole speech. And part of the crowd listening to his speech is his superior, the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol is on the lines there listening to speech. Okay, likewise, Grusha v'chalutza l'kohen hedget, a divorcee or someone who went through the chalitza process, which you just described earlier, which is this fellow whose brother died, and he's supposed to marry his deceased brother's wife, his sister-in-law. But instead of marrying, they decide they don't want to marry, so they do this process called chalitza, which is a separation process. So he's not a divorcee officially, but it's because he was never married to her, but he's kind of a divorcee because in some sense, Torah connected it to from the first marriage. So whether it's a divorcee or whether it's a person who went through this thing called chalitza, l'kohen hedget to an ordinary kohen. This is someone he's not supposed to marry. So this woman went through chalitza, and now she can marry whoever she wants because she's no longer connected to the brother-in-law, and now she marries a kohen. They're not supposed to marry because a kohen is not supposed to marry a divorcee. So likewise, if that were their relationship, this kohen would stay on the battlefield, not go back home, because again, this marriage is not sanctioned by Torah, even though the halachic marriage takes hold. Likewise, mamzeres v'nesina liYisrael. If a mamzer, which means a person born of an illegitimate relationship, they call it the definition of mamzer is disputed elsewhere in the Gemara, Ksubis and Yavamis, but a mamzer is a person born of an illegitimate relationship, and a nasin, a nesina. Nesina is a woman who's born from the Givonim. These are people that they're Jewish. One is not supposed to marry them. A person born of a legitimate Jewish union is not to marry them. They have their own system of how they marry. They marry each other, and there's a certain amount of generations in which they can reintegrate into the community as a whole. But the general Jewish populace is born from legitimate Jewish marriage and not supposed to marry these people. So if they did, so there's a fellow who married a girl who's born of a legitimate relationship or a girl from the Givonim, then he doesn't go back home from the battlefield because, again, he wasn't supposed to marry her. Likewise, the reverse. Bas Yisrael, a daughter, lamamzer v'nosin, to a person who is from Givoim, or a person who's born of an illegitimate relationship. So he's born of an illegitimate relationship. He's at the battlefield. He doesn't go back home if he's married to an ordinary Jew, because, again, he wasn't supposed to. An ordinary Jew meaning a regular Jewish girl.
Unfighting.
That's right. So all of these, they would not go back from the battlefield. They would stay right where they are. Rabbi Huda adds, someone who rebuilds his house exactly as it was. So he just reupholstered his house. I don't know if that's the right word. Reupholster goes for chairs. But how would you say that?
Renovated.
Well, Rashi describes it as he built it to the exact, sorry?
Just rebuilt.
But to the same measure that it was before. If he destroyed the house and he built an entirely new house, then it would be considered a new house and he would go back for more. But if he rebuilt it in the exact same way that it was before, then he doesn't go back home. That's the Reader's opinion. So he's doing that, I suppose, because the house is the same as it was. He must have redone it just because he wanted to strengthen the foundations or whatever. I don't know.
Well, what's the whole concept about, like, why does it matter so much if he built something
new?
Now he needs to go back. Isn't the whole concept that he should be with his wife?
That's only one. There's three categories.
It's about being in that construction. What is that?
Yeah.
Meaning, what is that?
There's three categories.
That guy.
There's three categories.
He built the house, so he should just sit in the house.
Yeah.
And not fight. Like
three categories: built a vineyard, built a home, or married. The point is, he started a new phase in life, and he hasn't begun it yet. He has it there ready for him, but he hasn't begun it yet. He has a woman, he hasn't married her yet. He has a house, he hasn't moved in yet. He has a vineyard, he got to get to enjoy it yet. These are like the three staples of a man building his life: being married, building a home, and having a business.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose that's why these three categories specifically.
Okay.
So it's the structure. It's physically structured. You own a home yet?
Well, I have an apartment. I don't own it.
Okay,
Yeah.
but that's when you own a home, you understand the value of what it means. You own your own home. It's a unique stage in life, which I didn't appreciate till I bought my home a couple of years ago. I'm serious. It's a new stage in life where you buy your own home. The same thing is true. I imagine, I'm not an entrepreneur, but I imagine entrepreneurs have a similar experience. When they start a new business, it's like a new phase in their life.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why these three categories. But if you rebuilt his house to be exactly as it was before, says Rabbi Huda, you stay in the battlefield, you don't go home because you've already inaugurated your home. You just redid the walls, but it's the same house. So he wouldn't go back from battle, he would stay right there. Rabbi Lezer says, likewise, someone who builds a home of levanim is mortar, as opposed to stone, so brick and mortar, in a place called Sharon. So apparently, Rashi explains in this area called Sharon, these homes would fall apart very quickly. So you're constantly rebuilding your house. So if you build a house over there, you wouldn't go back from the battlefield. That's the kind of house that doesn't have the longevity. We're like, I just describing. You built the house, you're starting a new phase in life, and you haven't even got to move in yet. With these homes, it's like a temporary structure you're building that's coming back down, so it doesn't have the same kind of value, and therefore you don't go back home. You stay right there in the battlefield. Now, finally, the Mishnah says like this: the following are people who don't leave their places, meaning they don't even go to battle. So the people mentioned before, they go to the battlefield, they hear the speech, and they go to become JOBNIKs. They go to the kitchen work, they work the field, they work the roads or whatever. They have their duty. And the following are people who don't even go for that. They stay right where they are. They don't even go out to battle. Namely, Bana Bayis, the guy who built the home, and he did inaugurate it, but it still was in the first year. Not the Kerem, he did plant a new field, and he got to spend it. He transferred that money to the money to Shalaim, and he's able to spend it now. And one who marries his actual betrothed woman, that's the first year, so he stays home. Right? And Hakainis is and one who does marry his deceased brother's wife. So it's interesting. If you are designated to start this new phase in life, but you haven't started it yet, you go to the battlefield and do your duty and inaugurate your home and marry your woman after the war's over and your job's done. Right? So in other words, you're not married to her yet. So you don't have to be with her. But we don't want to put you at risk of dying and never being with her. Okay, so you do your duty as a JOBNIK. But if you're already with her and you've only been with her for a month, what are we going to rip you away from her now? So stay there for the year. And likewise, the new field and the new home.
So in Erison, he just is a JOBNIK.
But if he after yeah. So which means if he was unlucky and a war broke out between his Erison and his Nisuin, he's got to become a JOBNIK. But if he did Nisuim just before the war started, then he stays where he is. Doesn't even have to go because he's not going to rip her away or rip him away from his wife, even to be a JOBNIK.
I wonder if war is brewing, people start positioning themselves.
I wonder actually, if you're engaged and a war is brewing, it would be smart to seal a deal before you have to become a JOBNIK. But I imagine there were more patriotic people who said, "No, I'm definitely going to push the wedding off so I can go do my war effort." I'm sure there are. Sorry. Well, if you go back to the World War II, you had people on both sides. You had people who were 16, 17 lying about their age because they wanted to go to war. And then you had people who were looking for ways out of draft, right? So I imagine the same thing happened here. People are lying about when their marriage is because they wanted to go to war, and others who were lying about their marriages because they wanted to stay away from the war. I'm sure both existed.
In the Second World War also was prisoners of war. And the woman was married. This guy became prisoner of war. And he comes back 5 years later.
It's terrible.
She thought he was dead.
Yeah.
And she married somebody else.
That's also a very big problem. Guy doesn't show back from war. Nowadays, it's not such a big problem because we can track soldiers to know where they are. But in the old day, this was a huge problem. And it became what's called the Aguna crisis. Today, Aguna means a woman who's married to a husband, not divorced, and he's not dead yet. And she's stuck. She can't move forward. She can't marry anybody else, and she's not with her husband. So today that happens because someone's being not nice and not giving a divorce when he should. But in the old day, it happened, unfortunately, because of war. Guy's off in the battlefield. His regiment got captured. Is he dead? Is he alive? We have no idea. What's this woman supposed to do? Remarry? She can't remarry. She's stuck. So it was a big part of the rabbinic leadership was to find ways to allow these women to remarry. We have testimony that someone saw from afar that he was shot. Can we rely on that testimony? Did he die from the wounds? Did he not die from the wounds? Maybe he's captured by the enemy, he's still alive. These are things that were. It's a Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe was very big on dealing with this. The Achiezer, the Shuvas Achiezer, what's his name? I can't remember. He also writes a lot about this. But a lot of people in that generation, especially in Russia, where they had these drafts in mass, were a lot about during the Japanese-Russo War, and then before that, the War of 1812. There's all these women who were stuck.
Also, I heard in 9/11, they even used some phone calls. They heard some voices people saying,
that's right.
I'm not going to make it or whatever it was.
9/11 is a similar story because you have no actual proof of their death. You don't have a DNA or teeth or whatever, something like that. Yeah, that's right. They use the back in the day, it wasn't not just war. Guy travels for business, tells his wife I'm coming back in 6 months. 10 months go by, I haven't heard a letter yet. What do we do? Is he alive? Is he dead? We have no clue.
So what did they do in that typical case of a guy that just doesn't come?
So if they were smart, what they would do is they would give divorce before, and they would put a date on it. saying if I don't come back by X date, this divorce takes effect. Let's say give it a year, 2 years, whatever it is. And then she'd be divorced, then she can marry someone else. That's what they would do if they were smart. Sometimes it didn't happen. And then you have to have rabbis come up with ingenuity to figure out how they can allow her to remarry. Anyway, okay, so let's conclude the Mishnah. So again, someone who built a home, he just moved in, he built a vineyard, he just made use of it, he actually married his wife, either his betrothed or he married his sister, the sister-in-law, his deceased brother's wife, his deceased brother's widow. Then they don't even go to the war at all, they stay right home. Shneimar, as the verse reads, Noki yia lebeisa shana achas, he shall be free at home for a full year. Okay, so the verse says he shall be free at home for a full year. Lebeisai, he's free to his home. This means literally his house. If he just had his house, he gets to stay in his house for a year. Now the verse says, he shall be free to his home. But the word is an added emphasis of shall be. It could have just said he is free to his home, not he shall be free to his home. The fact that it added shall be, this means there's something else that he gets to be a year at home with, and that is his new vineyard. Now the verse concludes, and he shall make his wife happy for that year. This means his wife, and if he just got married to her within the year, he can stay home. And then the verse says, he shall make his wife happy, the woman that he took, which means not just his wife, but some other version of a wife. Asher lakach he took. Says the Gemara, Lahavi, Yesivimtoi, this is to teach us that even someone who married his deceased brother's widow, he too stays home. And the Mishnah concludes, they don't become JOBNIKs, they just stay right home. They don't even have to do that, because they have to be with their wife. So in other words, there's three categories. People who go to war. The other one is someone who we are keeping him alive so that later he can be with his house and his vineyard and his family, his wife. That would be the person who got the new home but didn't move in yet, got the wife but didn't marry her, and so on. And the third category is he just got his new phase in life, so let him enjoy it for at least a year. That is the Mishnah, and God willing, we will continue on Tuesday. Tomorrow, this evening, I'm driving B'ezrat Hashem to New York for the Kinus, for the conference of Shluchim. I'll be there over Shabbos, and Monday morning I'm driving back. So Tuesday morning we shall continue. Yeah, I heard about that. I like my hat. I'm okay with it. Again, unless my wife tells me she wants another one, I'm leaving it right there. Okay, have a wonderful day.
Is not allowed to marry a divorcee. Could he just live with her?
No.
And then gain status?
You can't be with her physically, intimately. So even after they get married, even though the marriage takes hold, every day they're together is an issue. Okay, have a wonderful day.
You were saying before, like mamzer, and if they have a kid out of wedlock, does that make it, or does that have to be
the big machlokes exactly what constitutes? So it depends. There's a big machlokes. Is it only chayve krisus, chayve lavin, or even chayve asay? There is an opinion. I think it's Rabbi Kiva who says any intimacy that's illegitimate, then the children are mamzerim. But I don't think it's the majority opinion. Rambam writes about this, and that's who qualifies as you mamzer. Different opinions. Okay, wonderful day, Yudin.